I'm going to be a little circumspect because the bankruptcy case is under consideration by the judge, and it was a long time, a lot of hearings. But we're hopeful that we'll get a favorable determination on the question of eligibility, unlike corporate bankruptcies, where you almost have a right to file a petition for relief. In a municipal bankruptcy, you have to request the judge to adjudicate you, to find you eligible to file bankruptcy, and then after that, an order for relief is entered, and you start developing a plan of adjustment, not a plan of reorganization, a plan of adjustment of debts. Because for municipalities, the principal question is adjusting the debt service, and that's what we hopefully will be able to do. Assuming that that determination will occur sometime this year, we're going to try to present a plan of adjustment forthwith, hopefully by year's end. We're trying to work with folks as best we can, some of our creditors, our labor partners, to see if we can reach a consensual agreement, but that's our time frame. We'll then have a time frame the next year to go through what's called a disclosure statement hearing. Have we provided enough information in our disclosure statement filed with the plan? That'll be followed by a confirmation hearing as to whether or not our plan is fair and reasonable and feasible. That is, that we can effectuate the plan and will not be adjudicated bankrupt again within the next 2 to 4 years. And then there'll be an effective date, which essentially is the end of the bankruptcy process forward. So hopefully that will all occur, provided we get an eligibility determination. There's no guarantee, none at all.
How do you feel, though, at this point?
We feel quite strongly. We've demonstrated that nobody's really questioning the fact that the city is insolvent. We can't pay our debts as they become due. That's not in question. Nobody's really questioning our desire to effectuate a plan of adjustment. We clearly want to very badly. The real issue centers around whether or not we tried to negotiate with our stakeholders in good faith. They believe that we did not. We strongly believe that we did. And part of the reason we believe so strongly that we did is it's not just the period of time from my appointment to the filing date of July 18th, but what most people don't recognize is the period of restructuring has been going on throughout 2012. I mean, the first analysis by a Detroit review team was back in March 2012, which found that the city was under severe financial distress. In April of 2012, the city entered into a consent agreement. That was a document signed by the mayor, the governor, and the treasurer, specifying 39 different things the city was supposed to do to alleviate financial distress. It became clear that some of those things could not be achieved for whatever reason in 2012. In November 2012, the city entered into a memorandum of understanding with the state regarding Detroit reform, which specified even more things that the city was supposed to achieve, and actually required the city to hire consultants to help them achieve that. That was signed by the chief financial officer, the program manager for reform, and at that time the finance director and the treasurer. And then it became clear there was another review team in December of 2012, and they had essentially voted or determined in February 2013 that the city was in a financial emergency. And the governor on March 1st, 2013, issued a letter, I think it was over a dozen pages of findings of fact about the nature of the city, and that there was a financial emergency. So the process has occurred throughout 2012 and 2013. It was very deliberate. It was very well documented. And in fact, many of the things that we're trying to do in the bankruptcy were specified and agreed to in either the consent agreement or the memorandum of understanding, which that process started in November, approximately 2011. It's almost been coming up on over a year.
Well, let's move to local politics. Mayor-elect Mike Duggan announced his leadership team for the transition. And he also said that he will not be allowed to hire anyone because of the bankruptcy. So my question to you is, how can he be an effective mayor without having his own cabinet in place?
Well, I think he can be a very effective mayor. I mean, I'm a receiver twice over now. In Chapter 11, I'm essentially a receiver, and under State Act, Public Act 436, I'm also a receiver. But that act provides for me, I act instead in place of the mayor and the city council. It's pretty clear. But that act also provides for me to try to cooperate and collaborate with the mayor, and I intend to try to do that. We had our first meeting last week. It was actually a very good meeting. I thought it was a very good meeting. And to the extent there are things that don't hit the core of the restructuring process, which is the fundamental goal to get this city back on track and to get us out of this receivership as quickly as possible. If there are things that are within the typical mayor's bailiwick, of organization and structure that don't impact, we want to pursue that. So it's going to be iterative. I mean, it's going to take some time for us to work our way through it. There is still a mayor in place. Mayor Bing still has 6 weeks left in his term.
Well, a lot of people say he's not effective. He's just a figurehead.
I mean, I have always said, and no one has ever heard me say anything critical of Mayor Bing. I personally have a great deal of respect, and I enjoy our personal relationship, and I give him a great deal of credit for being a mayor who came in here who was conscripted to restore a sense of dignity and honor to the office. He was in the private sector minding his own business, and he did that. So people may say that, but the mayor achieved many of his goals, and one of them was putting the city right the ship, and now it's up to me to chart a course and get it back to shore.
But he's been pretty critical of you, and,
sure.
and for that matter, the governor, saying that, he felt like you all set him up, that there was supposed to be this partnership between his office, your office, and the governor. Do you think that he was misled to believe that he was going to have more power than he actually has?
I don't think so. I mean, I've understood that, and I've never, sort of responded to that. I understand concerns, and I said that when I first came in. It's going to be hard for someone. Mayor Bing is a very storied individual in the country's history. He's an NBA All-Star. He's received the NAACP award, Spring Arm. Went to school at Spring Arm. He is an alpha, and I can understand his concerns, but my view of it is, I was hired to do a job. The statute gave me certain responsibilities to do that job, and I'm going to use them to get the job done. And I can understand how someone felt that was unfair to them, but to me it was central to what I had to do.
He also said that you haven't really been effective, that he doesn't believe that city services have improved, that public safety has improved. Tell the people of Detroit what you've accomplished in the 8 months that you've been here. Sure.
Well, we started out trying to get a true view of the city's financial condition, and we did that. And this was probably the first time in a long time history of the city, in not just absolute debt, but some of the practices. For instance, the city borrowed from the pension funds and gave them an 8% script on those borrowings. We then tried to discuss some of the initiatives that were specified in the consent agreement, and remember an understanding that the mayor agreed to, I didn't agree to, that were not achieved, and we've done that. We're going to select a new solid waste contractor and let those contracts. We set up the Public Lighting Authority, and just several weeks ago the lights started to go on. We have a new police chief who's a change agent since his tenure has been here. People may debate whether or not it's due to his tenure, but I'd like to think it is. But crime actually has gone down by 12%, even though we've had some well-publicized events. Yeah, even with all the shootings and murders we had last week. I'm from Washington, D.C. That was unheard of. I can't remember a time in covering Detroit for decades that I've seen a week like that. Yeah, that week was particularly bad, but on an aggregate basis on the year, crime is actually going down. Now, we have instances, but like I was going to say, I'm from Washington, D.C., and let me tell you, I invite anyone to go to WashingtonPost.com and read our crime page every week. That day of those shootings, we had some pretty bad events in the city itself, too. So it's endemic. Unfortunately, many of you know this from your own cities, citywide. We've got the Blight Authority, Detroit Land Bank and Initiative entered into an intergovernmental agreement regarding blight. We have a new chief land officer and an advisory committee that's setting out a plan to get the blight, and we've given some money to the authority to go forward. It's very controversial. The Belle Isle lease, which relieves the city of a lot of operational debt and obligations, but imposes upon the state an obligation to take care of that island. I've heard some of the city council people very upset with that, more with the term than with the concept of Belle Isle, because the majority of Detroiters supported that deal 2 weeks ago. We've also dealt with some financial operations. We did default on several of our obligations, but we're paying our vendors now on a 30-day net basis, the first time I'm told in the better part of a decade that we're doing that. We're flowing positive in cash flow going forward. And most recently, which will probably become final, we reached an agreement with one of our public safety unions, our EMTs, police officers union, on a new collective bargaining agreement. Still has to be approved by the state, but it indicates our willingness to reach an agreement with any interested party that wants to work with us on our swap transaction, which a lot of people disagree with, but we're going to relieve the city of an almost $400 million obligation that was entered into in 2005 and 2009, 2005, 2006, and was collateralized in 2009, which pledged our casino revenue about $180 million a year. That will free up that cash for us to use to reinventing services. So people have their opinions, but the facts are that there are very specific metrics that we've met in the roughly 6 months that I've been here that had not been met for a significant period of time.
And back to Mayor-elect Duggan, how much authority will he actually have as mayor?
Well, we have that under discussion. I mean, we're in the heart of the consent decree, not a consent agreement. We're in the heart of the restructuring process in bankruptcy, and I have to be very, very careful that we don't do anything to imperil that. And there are a lot of people, a lot of our creditors and stakeholders that are contesting some of the assumptions in there, so I have to be careful to the extent that anything that's done on the operational side does not impact what we're trying to do in restructuring. So we're going to work through that, probably very deliberatively and very carefully, so we make sure that my pledge to the mayor-elect is that hopefully when I, as emergency manager, am ready to exit the city, I give him the best balance sheet and ledger that a mayor has had probably in 50 years. The city will then revert back to the ordinary course, regular order. There is a new council, there is a new mayor. They will have a 4-year term, the balance of their 4-year term, to take that up. And really, from my perspective, it's not so much how I work with the mayor in this time, is that I keep my obligations as a receiver, both in bankruptcy and under 436, to restore the city, give that authority back to the mayor and city council, and that they have the capacity to meet much of the reinvestment, restructuring, and remediation efforts that need to be everybody agrees needs to be undertaken in the city.
What is the game plan if Judge Rhodes says,
oh
no dice, this bankruptcy will not go forward?
That's a very difficult question because we have defaulted on some of our debt obligations. We are not going to borrow as the city has in the past. Just to give you an indication of our borrowing addiction, if you will, in 2005 and 2006, the city borrowed $1.44 billion, as you remember, and that borrowing was supposed to cure the pension issues then. 2.5 years later, it became apparent that that wasn't working, and we were in default under that borrowing. So we entered into a collateral pledge agreement with the swap counterparties, which were the interest rate swaps that we entered into in connection with the borrowing, to pledge our casino revenue, which is the single most consistent source of revenue for the city, to secure our default in the collateral pledge and optional termination agreement in 2009. The thing that's so troubling about that is that swap bet was basically a bet that if interest rates were going to go up, we'd be in the money, but if interest rates went down, we would have an obligation. What hasn't been widely discussed is, if people will recall, in 2008, fall 2008, the financial crisis was on us in earnest. And not just the auto companies were going in, Chrysler and GM, which I had some involvement with in the Chrysler case, but also we had Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, WAMU, Indimac, all throughout 2005, 2006. What's really unknown is that from November 2008 to March 2009, the federal government, as a matter of monetary policy, entered into something called QE1, quantitative easing. And they flowed money into the system, to the financial system of the country. So did England, because the swaps were indexed to LIBOR, London Interbank Rate. So that purchase, and this is the amount of money that was put in. At that time, our GDP as a country was about $16 trillion. The Federal Reserve and other federal agencies bought $1.75 trillion, roughly 12% of our GDP, in 5 months to drive interest rates down. So by the time we entered into the collateral pledge agreement because of the swaps, it became apparent that interest rates were going down and we were going to be on the hook for an almost $400 million termination fee because in 5 months the federal government had bought 12% of our GDP in paper, T-bills, commercial transactions. So it was an ill-advised transaction to begin with, 2005, 2006. It was an ill-advised collateral pledge agreement entered into in 2009, and that put the city on the hook for basically either a termination payment, and if a default, that our casino revenue, the $180 million, would go away. That's essentially all of the city's discretionary income on a regular basis. So given that if we don't make eligibility, that obligation is still out there. Hundreds of millions of dollars in obligations we can't meet. We have deferred over $400 million in pension payments that the city owes to the pension funds that we haven't made. We're running this year a $385 million, what they call accumulated operating deficit. That's money we have no way to pay back that we borrowed just to run city operations, not long-term debt. And we still owe $6 billion in secured debt to DWSD, $5.7 billion in OPEB liability, that's healthcare liability for city workers and employees, for which not one dime has been put aside. $3.5 billion for pension obligations that we can't pay, and $2 billion in unsecured general obligation bond debt. That's $18 billion all in, $12 billion unsecured. We give you an indication. $200 million is what the city has for discretionary, fill every pothole, put salt down in every city, in every street, whatever, during the year, have the 4th of July celebration, Angels Night, everything else. If you took that money and never filled another pothole, never hired another police officer, never had another jazz festival, against $12 billion, it would take 60 years. 60 years if the city did nothing else to pay that off. If we're not eligible, it's a significant crisis for the city.
What do you do though? You're the man.
Well, what happens if we're not eligible is we'll have to try to find a way to operate the city in ordinary course until we would either have to go back and do a redo, which would extend the time out that we're trying to get through, or the city would try to operate in ordinary course, and the fear is that there still be a severe degradation in services that everybody agrees is unacceptable. So that's a Armageddon-like scenario that we don't think we should approach, but it's a risk. It's always out there.
So if Judge Rhodes denies the bankruptcy, you can do a redo, but does that mean in the process you would have to, if the issue was bargaining in good faith, would you have to go back to the unions and do all the things that you?
It might mean that it would depend upon what the order said or what the judge saw, but it might very well mean that a redo would go back and you'd have to bargain some more. It might be you might have to agree. It might be you'd have to start all over. We don't really know what would happen if we're adjudicated ineligible. What we do know is that we can't run the city based upon the current income stream and the existing defaults that we have if that were to occur.
All right, I'm going to open it up for members after this one question. There's certainly no doubt that you have to be tough as nails, and I get the impression that Kevin Orr is tough as nails. But how is Kevin Orr really doing? I mean, how have you been welcomed to Detroit?
Yeah,
do you think you've been treated fairly by the media?
I learned a long time ago, I come from Washington, D.C. If you want a friend in Washington, you better buy a dog, okay? That's not going to happen. So, different media will have different agenda. 3 rules of Washington, it's never the crime, it's always the cover up. Number 2, never believe your own press, good or bad. Just don't believe it, because it can turn on you. And, number 3, don't think you can get away with it. So I came to the city in good faith, frankly, as a matter of public service, and I think this is a city that everybody agrees is a storied city, the motor city, the arsenal of democracy. Detroit changed the way America lives and works. I mean, we created suburbs. I mean, we created the living wage with Henry Ford. Heck, Henry Ford, for all his faults, given historically, I mean, even he was considered relatively progressive by founding Inkster for his African-American workers and founding Dearborn for his white workers at a time, but thought they would be equal. Detroit also has suffered, both officially, there's a great book, The Origins of Urban Inequality, I think it's by Thomas Segru at Princeton University Press, and it chronicalizes the racial history of Detroit from basically the turn of the century to 1966. It was re-edited to 2005, and that issue, the issue of race and politics and class has been central. So I, having studied the city, having a great deal of affinity for the city, and recognizing that the Northern Hemisphere Western democracies around the world would not exist without the city of Detroit, with the way it is, and some of the other issues in Detroit, I have a great deal of affinity for it. So your direct response to your question was, how am I doing? I'm doing quite well. I firmly believe in what I'm doing. I think it is long overdue. I think it is a heavy lift. I think it angers, embarrasses, invariably gives people a great deal of concern. I think people have questioned my motives, what I'm after, so on and so forth. And that's fine, because the real adjudication of how well I'm doing is going to be at the end of this process, and it's going to be in the years to come as to whether or not all of this was worth it. I firmly believe it was worth it. When I was in the Chrysler case, even in the C-suite of the company, we heard people will never buy a car from a bankrupt auto company, it will fail. They're making wonderful products, outstanding products. The Fiat Group has transferred over $3 billion of technology alone to that company. Their supplier for the new Viper is actually a supplier for the Ferrari. So, every case I've been in, people have usually said it can't be done. I mean, I've lived my life on it can't be done. So personally, I'm doing quite well. I'm all in on this deal. I firmly believe in it, and I have a high degree of confidence that we're going to be successful at certain levels, and I recognize that in doing that, there's going to be a lot of slings and arrows that come with the job, and that just comes with the territory.
All right, and Karen's going to assist with the Q&A, and when you ask your question, if you could just say your name and affiliation, and Karen, why don't you pick the first person, and while you're doing that, Kevin, do you think you've made any mistakes?
Yeah, I do. One, I think, is I took a lot of time trying to restore a sense of calm and normalcy to the city when I first got here. For 30 days, I really didn't do a whole lot. I thought that was necessary, and looking back on it, that was a lot of time. And I probably should have done a better job explaining to people the history of how we got here and why it was so critical. The other thing is, I made a comment that I'm lazy. Yeah, and we were talking about the city in the 20s and 30s, quite frankly, when it was predominantly white and had all this money, and it was taken up. I would know that Senator Cory Booker used that same statement at the March on Washington 2 times after I said it. And for people to think that I would think that way, or insult, I think I've been vetted pretty extensively from being here. Even the opponents I've had in other jobs have said I'm not that kind of person. So that was surprising to me, that people would think I would, either be self-hating or actually have that sort of condescension. And I probably should have jumped on that a lot quicker to say, hey, that's not how I was raised, that's not who I am. But I think we've gotten by that now, so I'm pretty comfortable with where we're going. Yes, sir.
Mr. Orr, thank you very much for being here. Andrew Humphrey, past president of the Detroit chapter, working at WDIB, also a life member of NABJ.
I've seen you.
Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate that. Also, DC area native.
Okay.
My question is this. As you may already know, with many corporate bankruptcies, the CEOs and managers that come in, they often negotiate and receive pension packages or retirement packages of their own. So do you or any member of your team, or will you, have a pension or a retirement package negotiated or done by the city of Detroit, the state of Michigan, or any other public entity?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, everybody that I've hired has been on a PSC, a personal service contract. A little known fact in the city is that when you hire somebody as an FTE, a full-time equivalent, their benefit package is typically 108% of their salary. So if you hire somebody at $100,000, you're actually making a $208,000 spend. Everybody that I hire, if you see somebody with a contract for $143,000, for instance, it's not $280,000, it's $143. They pay their own, I pay my own COBRA and other benefits. There's no plans at all for any of us to benefit in terms of a pension plan. I know there's been some discussion at the county of some things that were done. There's nothing like that in the works here. We're all working straight contractor salaries. New mayor might want people to come in on FTEs, and that's his choice because he may want them to be there. But the people I hire are working with me in an emergency as part of my restructuring team, and we don't get any benefits at all.
But when he comes in, when Mayor Duggan when Mike Duggan becomes mayor, he'll have no say over that, will he?
No, he will. I mean, if he, I am ultimately responsible for the statute for all staffing and employment. But if he wants to hire somebody forever, I have tried to be very respectful of the roles of elected officials versus an appointed official. And if he wants to hire somebody that's critical to his team and vision, and also for the future, I think it's entirely appropriate that he have the authority to do that. But I approve that authority. So no, I'm not going to burden him with sort of the same standards that I put upon myself because I am an emergency manager. He will have the opportunity to make decisions that he views as a mayor that exist after I'm hopefully gone.
But while you're here,
Right? Even while I'm here, if he wants to hire
people, but it has to be okayed by.
well, ultimately I'm responsible for all decisions, but I have no doctrinaire predisposition that he has to do things the way I did it. He is a mayor, he has been elected, and I'm going to try to be respectful of that, even while I'm here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, Mr. Orr. I'm Mike Tiger Price, Detroit Documentary Television, Black Documentary Television, Detroit, I should say. In reference to Belle Isle,
Yes.
how soon does an audit of Belle Isle's core competencies, budget and assessment in real time start to take place under the new agreement?
Under the lease agreement, there is an annual analysis of where it's going and spent. The interesting thing about Belle Isle agreement is, you know, I use the figure when I talk about it of $6 million, because that's the cost to the city. The reality is to maintain it, probably the way it should be maintained is probably higher than that. There are 3 state agencies that are going to be involved in that. There's Department of Transportation, there's Michigan State Police, and there's also DNR to maintain it to DNR standards. I know a lot of people were very concerned that there was a lack of specificity as far as what they're going to do, but we think that the lease and the DNR standards that are required, I'll give you an example, by the Clinder Cut, the park, his name's escaping me right now, it's a state park.
Milliken State.
Thank you very much, Milliken Park. And it's maintained to a very high standard. I see no reason why Belle Isle and the whole Belle Isle will not be taken. You know, there's a golf course out there. There's
Yes,
a boathouse.
we golfers miss it.
They're petting. Imagine a better golf course. So I think this is going to be a huge net benefit to the city. Stay tuned. We'll start to see changes next spring because the state is going to work on it almost immediately. But in direct response to your question, there's an annual audit as well as requests going in on a regular basis.
Thank you very kindly.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Mr. Price.
Why 30 years? That's been the critical
You know,
issue.
let's get to that. Many of the improvements on the island are going to require capital improvements, and there may need to be bond issues. Typically, with a bond issue, the purchaser of a bond for municipal bonds is 30 years. That's the typical amortization rate, just like your mortgage. Typical conforming mortgage for FHA loans is a 30-year mortgage, right? You get a better interest rate with a conforming mortgage than you do with a non-conforming mortgage. So this is very similar. The issue for a lower interest rate, and it's not that I'm doctrinarily averse to a lower term, but the issue is the cost. So for instance, if you can go to the bond market and state and get capital funds at an interest rate of, say for instance, 4%, 3%, 6%, whatever it is, and if you want a shorter term, the bond issuers might say, well, now your interest rate is 5, 6, 7%. On tens of millions of dollars, that's a huge increase. In addition, what bond issuers have done in this city, forget what they typically do in this city, what they've done is require you to agree to termination payments, which is a standard term on bond issues, because what they're guarding against is the loss of the expected income stream that they put their customers into over 30 years. Okay, we've seen how termination payments hurt us with regard to the swap transaction. You know, DWSD had a termination payment that it paid $500 million in a termination fee. So if you have a shorter term, you're running the risk of a higher interest rate, more cost to the city. You're also running the risk of your lender saying, I want a termination fee, and I'm not going to put this city in another position of dealing with the termination fee when the last 2 times we've done that, they've been disastrous. That's why 30 years. If someone can show me a way to do it less than 30 years at the same rate of interest without cost to the city, that's not something of concern to me, but we're doing it in an orthodox fashion because that's what benefits the city and the capital improvements necessary for the island. The reality is, after 30 years, actually it's 28 years, 28.6 years, the city, a year and a half before the lease is set to expire, gets to opt out of the lease. That 30 years will go by very quickly, but you're going to have a better island. It's going to be improved. And I know that sticks in a lot of people's craw, and as I said to someone the other day, look, I don't want anybody to think that I don't understand the history of Belle Isle. I grew up in South Florida when Palm Beach was a sundown town. You know, at 6 o'clock, they raised a bridge. Both of my grandmothers were 8th grade educated maids who worked over on the beach. My grandmother, Theodora Jackson, walked the Seaboard Coastline Railroad tracks 6 hours, 6 miles to work in the morning and 6 miles back. And if you got caught on Palm Beach after sundown and you didn't have a note from your employer, the sheriff would arrest you as a vagrant and put you in jail overnight. Okay? I understand the history of Vail Isle and how sensitive this is, and we could and could not go there. I get it. But I'm doing this based upon what's necessary financially and what makes sense logically for the island that needs to be improved.
Kevin or Angelo Henderson.
Yeah, Angelo, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, I know. I need to see you
on the show. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
need you
okay.
back on, man. 18 months. I keep it. When does it end? Because it seems like it's a floating time period.
No.
What month, time? When
September 2014.
Okay.
My 18 months runs from my first appointment, which was September 25th under 72. I was reappointed September 27th under 436. I have 18 months from then.
So September. Now, how likely? Because people keep saying emergency managers often stay longer than the 18 months. You realize, right? That's the norm.
Look, there is a very clear reason why that's going to end, and it's called my wife. The boss lady has told me that's what I got. I love my wife very dearly. I want to stay married to her. She's my little princess. She's the love of my life. She's the mother of my children, and I made a commitment to her, and I'm going to keep it.
You hired your former classmate, Stacy Fox.
Yes.
$175,000.
Yes.
She's now known as your top deputy. Can you explain the delineation of duties between her and former city councilman Gary Brown? Because we're kind of confused.
Well, you shouldn't be. I mean, it's not unusual. If you look at an organizational chart, typically you have someone in the C-suite, you'll have a deputy. In federal government, I spent 10 years in federal government. 4 of those years as a deputy director of the U.S. Trustee's Office of the Department of Justice, and 1 year as director. So you typically have a deputy, but under that level, you'll have chief section chiefs and operators. Gary is a chief operating officer of the city. So just like we have a chief financial officer, we have a general counsel, Gary is a CIO, but Stacy is my deputy. Furthermore, as my deputy, she essentially speaks for me and coordinates all of our efforts throughout the city. So I'm very lucky to have her. Actually, this isn't widely known. She gave up a very nice spot with a Fortune 100 company as general counsel to come here and help us. So she made a personal sacrifice to do that, and I'm thankful for it.
So she's number 2, then Gary Brown would be number 3?
It's not so much number 3 or number 2. You know, the way I work and the way I worked in federal government and in 3 different federal agencies is I like to think that we work more collaborative as opposed to structurally martial. You have this level, you can only speak to her. We all work together. She is my deputy, so she's right under me. But Gary is a central part of what we're trying to do. He, as you know, longtime Detroit resident, ex-head of internal affairs, city council person, so I wouldn't give him a number. I would think that we all work together as a team.
All right, so good job.
Thank you. Hope to see you again.
Kevin, let me just ask you one thing, because I read the first contract. That actually had dates in it. It went from March to March under the previous act. The second contract, which was signed after the new act took effect, does not have an end date.
But the act does. The 436 does. And here's how 436
The second contract.
The second.
I'm not your contract.
No, I'm talking about my contract. 436 says that after 18 months, the existing city council gets to vote to fire me, and in a strong mayor system, that strong mayor gets to approve it. I'm assuming that the new city council and the strong mayor, Duggan, who's coming in, will take themselves up on that opportunity under 436. I don't think they're going to say stick around a little longer. So assuming that's true, that's why I say not just my wife, but also the statute itself says 18 months. And I have no plans to try to extend that in any way.
Well, it says that you serve at the pleasure of the governor, though. So
the 13th Amendment, no involuntary servitude, I can always quit.
Sir, welcome
Yes, sir.
to the event here. I have different questions. You know, most people here, you know them. I'm not in the...
Nick, say who you are, darling.
Yeah. My name is Nick Najjar from Middle East Radio and TV.
Good to meet you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. But the question is, I do, beside the media, I do real international investments.
Right.
I have a lot of concern lately since we decided to go bankruptcy in Detroit. A lot of people from overseas coming here, they hold their investment. I have over $1 billion right now on hold. They waiting for me to tell them yes or no. They worry about Detroit, what's going on with Detroit. Either they want to move to different states to invest there, or they want to stop completely the investment. How can I assure those people, the one they have $1 billion, today Detroit need the $1 billion. We need every penny to
Sure,
Detroit, to
sure.
help Detroit. How we can assure these people, get rid of this concern and not to come to Detroit to invest?
I would say three things. First of all, the municipality of Detroit is bankrupt, but the people of the city of Detroit are not bankrupt. They are very industrious. They are very committed to reinvesting in the city and getting it grow and on its feet. And you have that kind of commitment that's going to exist irrespective of this effort. The second thing I would say is, I spent a fair amount of time going out into the community and talking with various community leaders, civic, faith community, as well as business people. You just saw 2 weeks ago, I think you saw a series of Singaporeans, Chinese investors buy the old Detroit Free Press building with plans to build a huge skyscraper. I've talked with people in the CBD, Central Business District, who actually have lost out on bids to other bidders from Israel, Denver, San Diego, the amount of interest in the city of Detroit and the opportunity that's here is tremendous. So I would say to your investors, they have to make, I'm not their investment advisor, they have to make their own decisions. Don't miss out, okay? Buy low, sell high, and this is another opportunity. The third thing I would say is in my lifetime, I left Michigan Law School to go to Miami in 1983, and in 1981 and 1982, Time Magazine and Newsweek had photos of Miami burning. There were race riots. And all of my friends were saying, are you out of your mind? Why would you go there? And I said, because the opportunities are tremendous. And at that time, the city was torn by strife, and it was quite violent. South Beach, which everybody likes now, down 5th Street and below, was where the Margaritos came from Cuba when Castro had opened his prisons in '79 and put them to Miami. Nobody wanted to be over there. Ocean Drive was derelict and dead. The one great thing about South Beach was that Muhammad Ali's training, the 5th Street gym was on 5th, and Michigan Avenue was still there, and you could go see Angelo Dundee actually training. But nobody thought Miami was going to be the city that it is now. Now, sovereign wealth, flight capital from South America and others have built that city up into an international metropolis. I left there in '91 and came to Washington, D.C., and the 7th and 9th Street corridors of Washington, D.C. were still burned out from the '68 riots when I was there. Tremendous strife. In fact, Sursum Corda, 7th Street, Florida Avenues, U Street, Cardozo, Shaw were all areas where even people would say, Kevin, you shouldn't go. And frankly, on the weekends, my weekend closed, most people cross the street away from me, okay, when they see coming. But that's what they thought. Well, now Washington, D.C. has a $500 million surplus at least. All those areas are thriving. I mean, on Florida Avenue, you have $5 million condos going up. Sursum Corda, you have young people running through the city. The amount of energy going on in the restaurant business and others is tremendous. So this city has the same feel to me that those two others did. It's a great opportunity. It is good, bad, right, or wrong. It is half of the GDP, $187 billion in the 5-county metro area in Detroit of the entire state. It's half of the state's population at about 5 million. It's a central city. In the turn of the century, there were 4 cities that were key cities in America: New York, Chicago, Detroit, and LA. To restore Detroit to its former luster, we have to go through this process, but once we do, it will be a great opportunity for people. The challenge that we have, I'm highly confident that in the 8 square miles up in Woodward Corridor, downtown, that's happening. That's happening now. The challenge we have is get that out to the other 130 miles of neighborhood. That's going to be the challenge. But as far as the opportunities that are here and whether or not people should invest, they have to make their own decisions. But I think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
Have you had an opportunity to talk to Dan Gilbert, and what do you think of what he's
sure.
doing?
Go Dan, go. I mean, here's a guy who is voting with his pocketbook at every turn. He's highly committed to the city. He's a strong defender of the city. He's invested. I know a lot of people are concerned that he's buying low, but you know what? Every great city has a patron. It doesn't matter whether it's William Randolph Hearst in LA, whether it was Carnegie in Pittsburgh, whether it was Astor in New York, who, by the way, came from Michigan. He was a fur trader, took his fur trader money, became a real estate developer in New York, or Rockefeller in New York. It doesn't matter whether it was Henry Flagler down in my area in Florida, built himself a railroad, FEC Railroad, to the south. Every great municipality and city needs to have a patron to support the development and growth of that city, and Dan Gilbert's playing that role right here, right now.
What about that criticism? Have you talked to members of the Michigan Black Chamber, the Detroit Black Chamber, and addressed any of their concerns about inclusion?
Sure, and I'm very concerned that through this process we do have inclusion. And one of the things I did in federal government when I was at the Residential Trust Corporation, was I was the legal department liaison to the minority and women-owned business and minority and women-owned law firm department. And we put in place under FIREA, Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act of 1989, there was a specific provision that 12% of those contracts were supposed to go to minority vendors, and they did not, because for a number of reasons, but a significant portion of them did through basic ordering agreements, task ordering agreements, and outreach. There's going to be a lot of work to be here, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that we need to include previously underrepresented people of color and women, for that matter, in the contracting practice. But as far as what Dan Gilbert is doing, you know, my question to people is, well, would you want the city to be without him and what he's done? 4,000 jobs, developing downtown, tax revenue? I don't think so. Okay, net positive. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Excuse me. I'm Felicia Henderson, Assistant Managing Editor at the Detroit News. I lead the entertainment and lifestyle coverage for the newspaper. We've covered the DIA's role in bankruptcy extensively.
Right, here we go.
Yes, here we go. Would like to know, it's been said that you're interested in monetizing the art. Are you, the collection, are you talking about renting it? Can you be more specific about what you would like to do in terms of monetizing it?
I'm going to stay away from specifics because, as you know, we're still in the eligibility stage, and I have an obligation to determine what the assets of the city are and what should be done with each of them. It doesn't matter whether it's DWSD, whether it's parking, whether it's the tunnel, whether it's the bridge, whether it's city-owned land, city-owned buildings, so on and so forth. And DIA is an asset of the city. As I said before, you know, the city purchased much of that art. There's 66,000 pieces. 35,000 are owned outright by the city. There are 3,500 which have been on display at any given time, and 400 are considered crown jewels, Matisse, so on and so forth. In fact, when I came here, I was talking to my detailer driving by DIA, and I saw Rodin's Thinker, and I thought, wow, there's Rodin's Thinker. You know, that's a very nice bronze casket. No, that's the Thinker. I said, well, they need to get that off the front yard because I'm about to pull a pickup truck up to here and, you know, take it away. But I mean, this is one of the best institutes in I'm just kidding, by the way. This is one of the best institutes, art institutes in the world, certainly in America. So we want to be very careful and very sensitive to the concerns people have about the crown jewels, and that you don't have to sell your grandmother's fine china and your wedding silver, you know, when you lose your job. Okay, and likewise here. By the same token, I'm a fiduciary, I'm a receiver, I'm responsible to account for all the assets for the creditors, and I have to come up with a solution. I haven't determined what that solution is going to be, but within the next 60 days or so, I'm going to have to.
Last question. When do you plan to meet with the leaders of the DIA? Is there a time frame to discuss resolution?
Yeah, I've met with some city supporters and relationships. Actually, DIA is run by DIA Corp, which is a contractor to the city. And we've, through my team, have had discussions with them. As you know, Christie's is doing an analysis of the art right now and has met with them. What I've asked from them, and I'm perfectly happy to meet with them, what I've asked is for them to come up with their own solution to provide some benefit to the city, because when I came here in March, I said two things. One, everything's on the table, and it is, and two, I have to look at all ways to monetize and provide revenue for any asset of the city. That's my job. And in bankruptcy, Chapter 11, this is very common. In municipal bankruptcy, it's very sensitive because these are crown jewels of the city, but it's very common in my experience. I've actually been over backwards a little bit in trying to get that solution resolved. I haven't even visited the Institute. I very much would like to, but I haven't because I didn't want people to say, you know, Kevin Orr's case in the joint. So I've tried to be very careful in how I behave with it, but you know, that time is coming to an end. We're going to have to come up with a solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Orr. My name is Carlton Stanton, and first of all, I'd like to compliment you on your dress.
Oh, thank you.
And can I get that tie?
Filings basement, never pay retail.
Okay.
Never pay retail.
Okay.
Filings basement, but I'll, if I find one, I'll pick one up for you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Orr, I'm a former executive director of the Detroit Cable Communications Commission under Dennis Archer.
Okay.
I spent 8 years in that administration. So I'm like an insider into Detroit city government.
Sure.
We have, as you know, many resources and jewels. And I hear jewels such as Belle Isle,
Right.
the DIA. There are also some other jewels in this city that does not get that type of notoriety.
Mhm.
And having spent that much time in administration, what I'm wondering, if someone had some information concerning one of these jewels that is not getting the type of publicity, and they wanted to get that information to you, to share it with you, is there someone on your staff that you would recommend?
Sure, absolutely. Stacy's my deputy.
Okay.
Certainly you can contact her, anybody, fortunate mayor that's giving some staff as my deputy, give it directly to her, or you can ask them to send it to me, and I send it usually to members of the restructuring team to vet it. But certainly you can send it to her, and we'll make sure it gets looked at.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, and have your attention, Mr. Orr has about 10 minutes, and unless you feel you can give us more time.
Oh, I can go. I'll go.
If we come forward with the questions, maybe just keep them to one so we can take advantage of time.
Okay.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Orr.
Good evening.
I'm Tamika Ashford. I'm a member of NABJ, and I'm also the president for the National Black Public Relations Society, Detroit chapter.
Okay.
My question is, it's not just my question, but a lot of folks, the darkness here in the city of Detroit, even in the Midtown areas, pitch dark. People have great concerns as to when will the lights actually be on? What sectors of the city will this take place in? What's the timeline? What's the game plan for this?
A very good question. Lighting, which is a huge issue. There is a public lighting authority, and to show you how important this is, even in our sort of dire financial situation, we were able to find $1.8 million that we sent to them 2 months ago for operating funds, and another $12 million that we sent to them for capital. For whatever reason, it took them a little time to get around to opening up the demonstration projects, which are currently on. So lights are going on as we speak, both at PLD in the city, which is turning on lights, and PLA, which is doing 2 demonstration projects, one in the west side of the city, one in the east side. We're going to LEDs as opposed to incandescent, and gas bulbs. They last longer. We're putting in different systems that people can't strip the copper wire out, so they'll stay. The second part of your question is, what is the lighting plan? And we have one for each section. We're trying to match that up with the blight remediation plan that was on the Detroit Future Cities, the mayor's 6 demonstration projects, that might vary. Some of the issues like West Outer Drive, East Outer Drive, Grand River, Gratiot, and others, which are major conduits, may receive additional attention earlier so that we can get them as opposed to neighborhoods. One of the factors we have to take into consideration, and the contract administrator, DTE, has been very helpful. They have charts, is whether or not this is just a question of above ground issues that we get to right away, or sometimes the switches are underground and require a work order to tear up the sidewalk and get to the conduits and all that. So that determines to some degree what we do and the priority it is. But let me say this, we have started lighting the city both through PLD, Public Lighting Department, which is city, and PLA, which is an authority. Right now in front of the court, we have a motion to approve a bond issue, which will give us an additional $50 million to help us light the entire city. You may have heard last week one of our creditor parties objected to the motion. The wisdom of trying to keep the city dark and keeping our school children who take city buses and oftentimes have to walk home in the dark strikes me as particularly curious, irrespective of what your creditor situation is. We're going to fight that motion with hammer and tong because we want to get the lights on the city as quickly as anybody else. I know this is a huge commitment of the new mayor-elect, and I expect to work with him on getting that done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Davis. I'm a reporter and anchor at WWJ. I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting.
Glad to meet you.
Good to meet you as well and talk to you. I had a couple of questions. I know some others had questions, like 2 or 3 questions, but let me just share this one. I'll preface it with something that I'm experiencing here in the city. I'm a resident as well. I received a letter from the city treasurer saying I had not filled out a return for a year. I missed a year. I question that. But, well, I'm being pursued aggressively to pay the taxes, which I'm dealing with, and I'm just wondering how the city is going after others who owe back taxes and how much is owed to the city and back in revenue.
Right. Let me answer that 2 ways. One, thank you for being so candid and for making that statement on a personal basis. That's the profiling courage, and I really appreciate it.
It's $1,000 you can help us.
Yeah, well, I'll take every dime. Okay, I am not proud. If it knee pads will help, I get down on my knees for you. Anything you can do to help the city, I'm willing to do it. But yes, we have to show to our creditors that we're doing everything we can to collect on AP, accounts payable, AR, account receivables, things that are owed to us in the city. So if that effort seems particularly aggressive, I apologize, but we need the money. The other thing with regard to others, as a matter of fact, we're involved in some pretty